Yum, yum!
Greg here from Pixel Fondue. This video is going to be about using Octane 2023's Photon kernel to create some caustic refractions on this great white shark here. So I created this animation a number of years ago, and I will put all the files for this up on the Pixel Fondue Discord. And if you aren't a member of the Pixel Fondue Discord, there'll just be a link in the description where you can join up. And it'll be in the Octane content channel along with all the other videos. We're just putting all the content on our Discord now. So if you like the videos and you want the content, you want the scene files, go to the Discord. Okay, so there's a number of boxes that need to be checked and some settings that need to be right for this to work. So this is sort of what this video is about. So we've got our shark here. Let's just start off with some water. We're going to put some water in the scene. Now, typically when I do water, and especially if we're doing water for caustic refractions, we need to have sort of low frequency detail for the bigger waves. We'll do that with geometry. You could do it with like a displacement map if you want to. I'm just going to do it with a transform deformer and a fall off texture. But really what's important is to put it on some high frequency detail, and you can do that with a procedural texture in the bump channel, or you can do like an image sequence on the normal map, an image sequence of water waves. Maybe that's been baked out of another program, and you can get some of those on ArtStation. There's some good ones there. And in this particular scene, I'll just end up using a procedural texture so I can share it. But let's just quickly create some water. So I'm just going to create a plane, hold shift, click on the plane. We now have a plane. I'm going to move it up a little bit. The shark is actually to scale. So it's like, 6 meters or 5 meters or something. It's a pretty big shark. So we'll go to polygon mode and just scale this plane up a fair amount. We don't have to make it huge. We're also going to use a new feature in 2023 that has like a post-environment fog, which will really help sell this shot. It's super important to have fog in underwater shots, and I'm glad we're getting some faster, easier fog now in Octane. So I'll show you how to set that up too. Anyway, so here's our plane, and I think we need to subdivide it a little bit. So just select the polygon, Shift-D, keep it at faceted, and we'll just keep doing it a few times. We can always add some subdivision mesh operations later if we want to, but I've got about, 100,000 polygons or so. That's quite a bit. Let me just maybe bump up the wireframe opacity a little bit there so you can see it. And then, so let's go over to our mesh operation stack and press tab and type in transform. And just pick that transform effector at the bottom, and then I'll create a locator in the scene, which will just move around the entire plane right now. And so what we want to do is just use a texture fall off with like a wave texture, and so we'll just move the points that are affected by that texture. So we'll just twirl down to fall offs, and we'll do a texture fall off. And then for the texture, we'll just use one called windy waves that comes with Modo, just like that. And we can maybe bump up the scale, or maybe we increase the wavelength. Either way, let me just go ahead and grab the transform effector and then press W for move and just move it up a little bit. You see now I've got some waves in the scene, right? Keep that on. Got some waves, and then if we want to increase the scale, which I may want to do, we can either do, it should be like a wavelength, maybe frequency 0.5. That'll do it. Okay, so that's a little bit bigger waves. And that's good enough. Looking below, we've got some waves, so it'll just kind of help sell the shot. Now, like I said, the waves aren't going to be high enough frequency detail to really focus the photons. We need to add a bump map to it. And so let's just select our mesh here, press M for material, the base mesh, and type in water. So we have a water material in the shader tree. And then I'm going to add an Octane override to it. So we'll add the Octane override, and I'm just going to take a quick peek at the schematic here with the override selected. We'll load that up. And I'm just going to hit render here in the Octane viewport so we can kind of track what's going on. And so we're going to turn our glossy material into a specular material. So just type convert or click convert to specular, and that's going to turn it into a specular material, which is water or glass and transparent, like light transmissive materials. And let's just change the index of refraction to water, which is like 1.33. And then we want to definitely click allow caustics. That's really important. So it's going to calculate the photons going through that surface. Index of refraction, caustics. Let's just keep fake shadows off. and keep thin wall off. It's important to keep those off. They don't seem to work with caustics, so make sure those are off. And then, yeah, let's go to our kernel over here, and let's turn on photon tracing. Okay, so we'll get back to these settings in 1 second. We're just going to have the photons active now. And then we want to change the lighting environment. Now, for photons tracing to really work well, you need a pretty intense light source. And so you can use an HDR with like an outdoor sun that's really hot, or you can use like a pretty hot light. In this case, I'm just going to use the daylight environment. Okay, so let me just turn on the daylight environment. And so pop open the environment tab, switch this to daylight, and you'll notice that it's like, evening or something. So we need to make a couple more adjustments. You should have a directional light in the scene if you're doing daylight environment, so you can identify the sun. So I already have my directional light called sun, but you need to make sure you click this physical sun button here. And now it can read the time and date and latitude and longitude and the north offset and all that stuff. So we've got the sun going and we've got the daylight environment going, but there's a couple of more changes I want to do here. One is the use texture environment checkbox here. And if I check that, you'll see we're back to our sort of ocean colors. And so even though we're using a daylight environment, it's going to ignore these colors here and the model. You can use Hosic is maybe a better one. And it's going to use the colors here in your environment here. So the 2-color gradient or 4-color gradient or whatever you want to use. And so we've got some nice ocean blue colors there. So that's sort of looking good. Back to our water. We want to adjust the bump and the bump height. It's usually at 1 millimeter, I think is what it defaults to. So I'm just going to up that by 10 to 10 millimeters. And I'm going to select the bump height channel. The bump channel, and I'm going to add a texture to that. So we'll say a new texture, and you can use this rain bump one here, and it's like sort of a ripple texture. It's great for like swimming pools and things like that. It's not super great for the ocean, but that one works pretty well. I'm going to use this turbulence texture down here, and you can see we're starting to get something on the shark now. We're starting to get some caustics there, but we need to adjust the scale and some other parameters to really dial that in. So I'm going to keep the power at 1. I'm going to turn the octaves down to like 2, so it's not quite as high frequency, right? So it's not quite as noisy. Just really quickly, this defaults to a linear projection. Let's unhook that and make this a UV projection, since our ocean is UV mapped and it's just a big flat plane. So we'll just change this to new projection and UV, mesh UV. And now we're going to adjust the scale here. Now, if you get this sort of weird meshing on the shark like that, that's because it's not getting the vertex data from the viewport. So you just have to pop open a viewport. I didn't have a viewport open. When you're using Octane, the initial render typically needs a viewport open to like get all the vertex data into Octane correctly. So now it's all in there. And then let's go back to our schematic. And now we just need to adjust the scale. We sort of made the scale too big. We need to shrink it down to get that sort of fine detail to get the caustic pattern on there. So I'm just going to select our transform values. And I think the best way to do this is just channel haul. So I'm going to select all 3 XYZ scale channels there. I'm going to pop open a little 3D viewport at the bottom because channel haul needs a 3D viewport to operate. So I'm going to press C for channel haul. You can see them all right here and just slowly sort of drag to the left. And you can see this caustic pattern starting to reappear on our shark there. And we'll get it down to like 10%. Maybe even like 7 or so, like that. Actually, that looks kind of cool. We'll go with maybe 7%. Okay. And then let me just close this and sort of expand this so you can see the shark a little bit better. In fact, I can zoom in a little bit so you can see this like kind of a cool caustic pattern down there now, right? And of course, like this Octane texture, you can animate the offset and just if you want to animate the scene, you can sort of probably sync that to the animation of the waves if you want to, if I were going to actually make this an animated scene. It's also going to be moving through the texture actually, so you could probably just leave it and have the shark swim through it. But yeah, it's looking pretty cool. Maybe a little too big. I may need to like make it a little bit bigger on him, something like that. Maybe it's a little bit farther under the water, but you can see this sort of cool texture on here now. So just a couple more things. Let's do the sort of the post volume of fog on this guy, and we've got some decent depth of field already. You can see the aperture here is at 8. That's pretty high. It's typically like at 1 or something. You see there's really no depth of field on the shark. If I bump that up to like 8 or 10, there's quite a bit, and it just, again, it adds that sort of underwater look and sort of a scale of the shark. Yeah, but let's do the underwater fog. So let's just get to a new schematic workspace. I've got one here already set up, just an empty workspace. And then I'm going to, on my camera here, I actually have it selected. Let's look in the channels and just type in the word. In fact, let me just double tap escape to drop everything. Reselect the camera. And under the little search here, let's type in post, and we'll see this channel right here called Post Volume Effects, Octane. I'm going to drag that into the workspace here. And then you'll see this new button here on 2023 saying new render setting. Click that and click Post Volume Effects, and it brings it into the workspace here. And you'll see some fog and light beams stuff in here. And I'm going to plug this into Post Volume Effects. Let me just sort of drag over here. Now, nothing has happened yet, but let's go to our camera, and on the post-processing tab, let's turn on processing enabled. And before I do that, let's just sort of zoom out on this shark a little bit so you can see it. So click processing enabled, and you'll see I've got a little bit of a fog going on here, right? And so I can, now I can work on sort of the distance of the fog. It's right now it's up to 1,000 extinction distance, and so let's click fog on and turn this to like 100. You can see it's getting quite a bit darker. If I go to like 5 or something, it's going to totally lose the shark. Now, one thing I would like is let's just go back to like 150 or so. And so now we've got this sort of underwater look. I would really like this fog to be non-linear, though. Right now it's just sort of a gradual linear extinction. Underwater in particular, like the red wavelength fades really quickly, and so it affects the colors of the objects. Red goes to black really fast underwater, and it's just a more realistic look. But this is good for this purpose. You can also just render a depth map if you want to. Just render a depth pass and then use that in Nuke or After Effects or Photoshop or whatever to like place, use it as a mat to place in some blue on top of that, and you can sort of adjust that in post if you want. But this works out pretty well. And the last thing we need is particles. So I've got some particles in here already. It's just let me just go to the 3D viewport here. It's just a particle cloud object with a replicator and like a sort of deformed sphere attached to that. So we've got some particles in the scene. And again, particles are as important to an underwater look as fog. So we need to have particles in there, and you see them sort of popping up around here. And then you can always go back in. Let's go back to our schematic here and take a look at our fog settings one more time. So you've got your fog here, right? And you've got, let me just pull this over like this. There's the fog environment contribution that's at 1. What that's going to do is use your environment texture here as the fog. Now, if I want to use a color as fog, let's just make this like red like that. And I want to back off of the fog environment and use the color. I just sort of drag this to 0. Now I've got the sort of red, right? But I don't want that. I actually just want to use that same color I have for the background environment, which is also doing the lighting for the fog. So something like that. And you can do things like you can go back to your environment and maybe bump up the sun intensity a little bit to heighten those rays, those caustic highlights a little bit. And you can even go do a couple more things with post-processing. You can go to the camera post-processing and maybe just add a little bit of chromatic aberration, just a tad, so you get a little bit up the top. If I add too much, you'll see it warping a little too much on the side there. It's looking very underwater, but that's like way too much. So let's just turn it back just a little bit. And you can even go into our water material if you want, and we can add just a little bit of dispersions, maybe like 0.1 or something. You'll see these caustic patterns starting to pick up sort of rainbow colors. That's probably too much, maybe 0.01. Something like that. Looks pretty cool. That's probably still too much. Yeah, it looks pretty cool. Got a pretty cool looking shark scene here. Just leave that. And then I will, we'll save this and put it back up on the Pixel Fondue Discord. Now, typically, if you're really want if you're closer to the top of the water, You probably want an HDR in the scene with a cloudy backdrop so the clouds refract through the water. So when the camera's underwater and looking back up, you typically see the sky and clouds refracted through the water. That gives a lot more realistic look than what we've got going on here. This looks like it's kind of deep down. And the water is a little bit more like a swimming pool. I'd probably change these to more of a deeper blue for the ocean. Something like that, maybe. You can also play around with, on the camera, like an ACES tone mapping. And that's just in the imager here. You can turn on ACES. And then which is, it's kind of a cool look. And then it does some compression of the colors there. And you can bring that back into After Effects or Photoshop or Nuke or whatever and adjust it some more. But yeah, I'm just going to go with this. And actually, I like that ACES on there a little bit better. Yeah, and that's, there you go. Caustics and Octane 2023 and Modo.
Yum, yum!